Merkel exit. Macron weak. Salvini strong. Brexit. The destruction of the EU is unfolding. Done. Click. Send. In 13 words on Twitter, Geert Wilders summed up the reasons for a jubilant mood among Europe's far-right nationalists. That's all it took. 13 words and the press of a button on Twitter. Over the last several decades, a broad alliance of big parties has called the shots in the EU. Politicians from the mainstream centre-right and centre-left have held a very comfortable majority in the EU's principal institutions, including the European Parliament, the EP, the European Council, and of course the European Commission. However, this era could come to an end with the next EP elections in May this year. This could happen because there's a waning support for mainstream parties. There are rising populists on both the radical right and left, and of course, as we heard yesterday, there are emerging new political players. Who knows if the Gilets jaunes will form the new Yellow Party in France? We'll wait and see. But generally, we can say that right-wing populists are on the rise across Europe. Their parties are gaining ground in Germany, Hungary, Sweden, Italy, and France. And the popularity in these movements is largely seen as due to the arrival of high numbers of refugees and migrants. Both Juncker and Angela Merkel have said there is a lack of cohesion within the EU, which is deeply concerning. These parties and their very popularity threaten to undermine the liberal democracy which Europe relies on. And ahead of these European parliamentary elections this May, we need to be concerned. And this is why Hungary was so heavily sanctioned for flouting EU rules on democracy and civil rights. This first step, taking sanctions, could eventually strip the country of any voting rights in the EU. The EU has been critical of the Hungarian leader Viktor Orban since he came to power in 2010, and he began cracking down on the freedom of the press and placed pressure on courts in ways opponents to his party said violate EU rules. Viktor Orban is firmly opposed to allowing any refugees into his country, and many believe that this is what precipitated the crisis in 2015 that led to the flood of refugees desperately pouring into Germany, Austria, and Sweden. Unfortunately, it seems that far-right parties are not losing their appeal for voters. Politics are now defined by identity rather than economic issues, and this is something we can see everywhere, especially with Brexit. And 19 of the EU's 28 national governments are conservative-leaning, 9 are centrist, and only 5 are on the left. At the start of my speech, I quoted you a Twitter post by Geert Wilders, and it's a good view of the situation from a far-right perspective. This far-right side aiming to bring down the massive and consolidated EU bureaucracy and aiming to re-establish national boundaries and national currencies. The German Chancellor Angela Merkel has been cornered. She was Europe's leading politician and supporter of a strong EU and an advocate for helping refugees. Yet she has suffered electoral defeat inside Germany, and she's stepping aside as her party's chair. She will not seek re-election as a chancellor, but who could possibly fill her boots? In France, President Emmanuel Macron's popularity has plummeted, and his bold vision of an ever more integrated EU in economics, culture, and military has run aground. In Italy, the Deputy Prime Minister Matteo Salvini, leader of the far-right League Party, is challenging the EU, and he's growing in popularity at home by depicting immigrants from Asia and Africa as uncivilized, violent, and stealing work from Italians. All the while, everything around is collapsing. Great Britain, a major economy inside Europe, is leaving the bloc this March, although that really depends on the vote in government today. Let's watch the headlines. And this will be in keeping with the Brexit referendum of 2016, an event itself which was seen by the far right as a breakthrough in the effort to take power away from the EU. But how did we even get into this situation? I suggest you swap if you're wanting to be halfway through the speech. So, how did we get into this situation? In 2018, Italy, a founding nation of the EU and its fourth most populous nation, became the most prominent example of the rise of the far right. In March, Salvini's party, which was actually founded in the 1980s with the goal to make northern Italy a separate country, won about 18% of the vote, and then joined the maverick Five-Star movement, which was formed by a comedian, to form a government. Since taking office in June, Salvini has become Italy's most visible political leader. I mean, you could argue that Berlusconi was the most visible with his tan, but that's a different speech. In Austria now, the far-right Freedom Party has been the junior partner in a coalition government with the Conservative People's Party since December 2017. In Austria, the members of these parties have been accused of holding anti-Semitic, neo-Nazi and anti-Islamic views. At least that's according to the Mauthausen Committee. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong. But this is an Austrian group that monitors extremist political groups. I've already mentioned Hungary. In Poland, we have a hard-right nationalist party in power called the Law and Justice Party. Bulgaria also has far-right nationalists, and they've been in power since 2017. The Czech Republic has a populist president with far-right views. Miloš Zeman is 74 years old, and he's serving his second term as a president, but this is a position that holds limited powers in the country. And in other countries, we've all seen that far-right parties may not be in power, but they have grown in popularity. This is the case in Germany, France, the Netherlands, Greece, Sweden, Spain, and Denmark. And all of this has paved the way for Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon has swept in from across the pond to save us. He's the ex-Goldman Sachs banker who helped elect Donald Trump. And he's since been exiled from the White House and ousted from his far-right website, Breitbart News. But now, he's come to save us. He's come to the EU and is running a campaign machine called The Movement, which is supposed to boost Europe's far right. He is running something called a political consultancy to help far-right movements campaign and better use social media ahead of the EP elections, the European Parliament elections in May 2019. He aims at taking down the EU from the heart, and he wants to take over. And he said, I quote, "I'm here to drive the stake through the heart of the vampire." Steve Bannon has not come to help. he's come to fracture the EU through far-right support through social media. But does he really pose a threat? Am I just being over-dramatic and paranoid? Well, Steve Bannon thought that his offer to help political parties would be irresistible, that everybody would be calling on him. But research from The Guardian, a British newspaper, has shown that thanks to electoral law, many countries cannot accept his help even if they want to. He's banned from providing help or doing meaningful work in 9 of the 13 countries on his target list. So that just leaves 4 to be worried about. The only 4 EU countries that could even take part in the Steve Bannon experiment would be Italy, Denmark, Sweden, and the Netherlands. The reason for this is because in the other countries, foreign organisations are banned from contributing to political parties, so they're safe. But because of this, where has Bannon decided to focus his efforts? Why, of course, in Italy. He's identified Italy as the main focus for his campaign, and of course, who is he aligning himself with? Well, Matteo Salvini, the most high-profile European politician to unequivocally sign up to the project. However, there may still be hope, because Italy's government is contemplating a ban on foreign funding because there is concern growing about this foreign influence. Because in 2013 in Italy, restrictions on foreign funding were lifted. So it's hard to say what kind of impact Steve Bannon will actually have. With these elections ahead of us in May 2019, everything could change, and we really need to be careful if we do not want the EU to collapse. If the current power balance that we have changes, then a very complex change could come across, and we could have more ad hoc coalitions instead of these traditional party divides. Whilst this may stop the Parliament in the EU from having legislative efficiency, perhaps there might be a more open decision-making process. And if this were to happen, that could have a positive effect on public interest in democracy at the EU level. However, if the populist parties do gain enough power, then they'd be able to block crucial decisions. And then all other parties will need to pull together if they want to keep the EU functioning. If they don't, then member governments would simply bypass the European Parliament by doing deals between themselves. Finally, and most importantly in my view, is that we need to show the public why European parliamentary elections even matter if we want to turn things around. Voter turnout has declined from 62% in the first elections in 1979 to 42.6% in 2014. That's a drop of 20% from 1979 to 2014. It will take a major outreach effort to highlight the programs that candidates are putting forward and to communicate on the transnational European dimension of the vote. We need to help hold the EU together and not allow these breakaway nationalist groups to gain ground inside the European Parliament. Let's hope that Steve Bannon and others will not succeed and that Brexit will not become a trend.